jQuery's CSS functions provide easy cross-browser access for setting properties as well as working with positioning and sizing information for elements that are in your web page. The CSS function allows you to retrieve and set styles for a set of matched elements. And up until now, throughout this title, you've probably been seeing me use that CSS function to make some of the early examples in this course visible to you on the screen. So we're going to take a few moments now and learn what it actually does. So it has a few different forms. The first and simplest form is this one right here, CSS, and you give it a named property. This will return the value of the named right here CSS property for the first matched element that you've specified here in the result set that you're calling this on. The next version right here, CSS with the properties argument, this will set the CSS properties of every matched element in the result set using an object notation syntax. And this is very similar to the attributes example that we saw earlier. And you can see here's an example, just creating an object that has a couple of properties and values to go with each one, and then calling the CSS function with that object to set the properties on the results of a jQuery expression. But if all you want to do is set a single style property to a value on all of the matched elements, you can do that right here. And this simply takes the name of a property, like width or height or opacity or whatever, and sets it to whatever value you give it. Now, if you just provide a number here rather than a string, it's going to be converted automatically into a pixel value, except for certain CSS properties, and you can see those listed here, like z-index or font weight or opacity or zoom or the line height. Those do not take pixel values, so that won't happen there. jQuery also provides a set of functions for working with CSS classes. Again, this is used very commonly in things like animation or interactivity. You're setting styles on elements and taking them off, and jQuery provides functions for adding and removing, toggling, and detecting these classes. And you can see those in this table. So as you might expect, the add class will add a class or class as to each one of the matched elements. The has class function will return true if the specified class is present on at least one of the elements that are in the result set that you're calling this on. The remove class is the opposite of add class. It'll just simply take that class off of all the matched elements. And then there's the toggle function. So the toggle class will add this class if it's not there already, and it will remove it if it is present. You can also call it with a switch. You can say, hey, add it if the switch is true, or remove it if the switch is false. So moving on, let's take a look at the positioning functions. So CSS positioning functions provide cross-browser way of figuring out where elements are on the page. And there's a variety of functions for this. So the offset function gets the current offset. This comes back with an object that has a top and a left. And same thing here. This is the offset parent, figures out the position parent of the first matched element in the result set. Position also comes back with a point, a top and a left. This gets the top and left position of an element relative to the parent that it's inside of. And then the rest of the functions deal with scrolling. So for example, this will either scroll top will either get or set the scroll top offset of either the first matched element in the case of getting it, or you can set the scroll top offset for all the matched elements in the result set, and the same thing for the left. And then finally, the CSS sizing information, you can figure out how big elements are by using a variety of functions that jQuery gives you. And again, these work across browsers. So the height functions will either get the current computed by the browser pixel height of the first matched element in the set, or you can set the height of all the matched elements. Same thing for width. You get the current width as it's been computed by the browser, or you can set the width. The inner height and inner width will, for example, get the inner height, and that means excluding the border, but including the padding for the first matched element. And the same thing for inner width. This will figure out how wide something is, but again, excluding the border and including the padding. And outer height and outer width work just the opposite. They will get the outer height, which includes the border and padding by default for the first matched element. And if you pass true for the margin, then the margin values are also included. And the same thing for outer width. It will get the outer width as it's been computed by the browser. And again, you can ask to have the margin included. Okay, so that's a lot to digest. Let's take a look at some of these functions in action. So in the exercise folder, I've got a file right here called CSS sizing. And I'm just going to bring this up in the browser so you can see what's happening. So you can see that we have a div here on the page, and I'm using some jQuery to compute various pieces of information about this object. So you can see I've got the height and width here, and the inner height and inner width, and the outer height and outer width, and the offset and the position in the page. So what I want to do now is go back to the file system and bring this up in Firefox. What you're going to see is that when Firefox comes up, and let me unmagnify this and move it over, you can see the values are pretty much the same for both browsers. They're both 180, they're both 250. You can see down here as well that the offset here is a little bit different for the offset and position. So let me go into the code and see that. The position is being calculated by the position, and the offset's being calculated by the offset. Now the offsets, remember, are a little bit different for each one of those guys. The top and the left relative to the document. So here, what we're doing is, here's all the spans. We're calling each one of these functions. So for the height, I'm calling the height function, the width function, and you can see here, when the results are filled out, that that's where the values all go. And you can see that that's how the browser is measuring each one of these guys.